Welcome, my friends of the interwebs, and this is going to be a video response to Lee Doran of the YouTube channel How the World Works. If you're not familiar with his channel and you are a conservative-minded person, definitely check him out. And if you're a left-leaning person, check him out too. You know, he's a cool dude. He's a really good guy. Anyway, his last video had made mention of his nightmarish experience on Amtrak, and I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Lee's from Chicago, and so that this story was of special interest to me, and I'll tell you why. I have wore a lot of different hats in my life. But at one time in my life, I wore one of these three hats. You know, I was a conductor for Amtrak. I was actually a promoted conductor, but because of seniority issues, I rarely ever worked as a conductor. Usually I worked as an assistant conductor. On the freight trains, they would refer to those guys as either brakemen or flagmen. Okay, but assistant conductor nonetheless. I was the guy, if you're familiar with Amtrak, who yelled all aboard, took your tickets. Now that is when I wasn't working in the yard switching cars. Okay, the reason Chicago is kind of near and dear to me is that I worked out. That's where I got my start. I got trained to be a conductor in Chicago. I lived in Chicago. I worked out of Chicago. And yeah, so when Lee told me that he was sitting on the train with no engine, we've referred to it as a head end, and he couldn't leave the station because they were waiting for the engine from another train to come so they could put that on their consist to be able to leave. It didn't shock me in the least bit. Amtrak is a quasi-governmental agency. It's kind of a hybrid corporation, very similar to what I think you would find in China. Yeah, I mean, literally. I mean, it's kind of like, it's a combination of a corporation / government agency. It's what it is. It's bizarre. And it's ran, for the most part, all the mandates come from the federal government. Most of the funding comes from the federal government. And, you know, I mean, by the way, believe it or not, I'm a supporter of Amtrak, and not just because I work there. I'm going to tell you real quick why. For me, it's a matter of national security. After 9/11, we were the only thing going. And I was working for Amtrak at that time period. We were the only thing going. And when all the planes were grounded, if you wanted to get home, you had to get on Amtrak. I mean, for the most part. Yeah, in some situations, you were able to go to the Dirty Dog, a.k.a. Greyhound. But for the most part, seriously, the trains were it. And, you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, these trains would be better off if they were ran, you know, if they were privatized. Well, here's the problem with that. There's only certain lines on Amtrak that are profitable. Okay, the freight carriers are not interested in operating unprofitable trains. They're just not. At one time, previous to the creation of Amtrak, they did. The freight companies ran passenger rail. They couldn't wait to get out of it. They were thrilled to death when Amtrak came down the pike. You know, the fact of the matter is, if you're running the Northeast Corridor where Amtrak owns all of its rails, and it's high speed of cell and all that, yeah, you can make some money. You can turn a profit on that line. But for the most part, if they privatize Amtrak or passenger service in this country, there will be no getting from New York to LA on a train. It just won't happen. It's just not something that anybody can make a profit on. So 9/11 told me that it was necessary to subsidize rail travel. Much like by the way, we subsidize city buses. You know, I mean, there's certain things that just are not going to ever make any money. Just the fact. But it's necessary. Now, you can argue that if you want. That's how I feel about it. Now, is Amtrak a bloody mess? Hell yes. I've seen things in my tenure at Amtrak. I've seen things that would blow your mind. I mean, first of all, I think everybody, what we need to do, instead of saying that we need to defund Amtrak, the first thing we need to do is clean it up. Okay, and there are ways to do this. I really think that. You know, I know that once you know, I mean, government agency. One of the things that Lee bitched, well, I should say bitch. One of the things that he brought up in his video was that there was a woman who was claiming that, well, if the government ran this, this wouldn't be the case, which is absolute nonsense. The woman had no idea what she was talking about. She was clearly a left-wing loon. Okay, because the government does run Amtrak, you know. So I mean, you know, it is what it is. But I think what needs to be done with Amtrak, first of all, we've got to get real in this country. Okay, and what I mean by that is, one of the things I think that hurts Amtrak the most, and I could tell horror story after horror story about this, is affirmative action. Literally, affirmative action. and the unions. Those are the two things that hurt Amtrak the most. The hiring practices of Amtrak are insane, and the union's insistence on the seniority rules are insane. And I'll give you one really quick example. I was working out of Toledo, and I didn't have enough seniority to hold a regular job, so I was working the extra board. And there was a woman who was one notch in seniority above me, who was a crack addict, hired through affirmative action. And she didn't give a rat's ass. It was one of those deals where her caseworker says to her one day, I'm going to cut you off your check. You need to go and apply for a job at Amtrak. You know? So to her, it was exchanging one government check for another, and she wasn't ever intending on working anyway. So this woman never showed up to work. When she did show up to work, she'd bring her 4 kids or 5 kids, however many. She had a whole litter of them. It didn't matter if she was working in the yard or working in train. It made no difference to her. She felt like, you know, I mean, and the money she was paid, she should have been able to handle the daycare situation, but it is what it is. She sold her radio for crack. I mean, it was just a laundry list of things that this woman did. But when there came a time when there were some furloughs handed down, and I got cut, and that's what led me that's when I moved out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and worked out of there. But I couldn't help but to be pissed off because she hadn't showed up to her job in 3 months. But yet, you know what? Affirmative action, you know, seniority from the union, and there was just, you know, basically I had to drive 2,000 miles to keep my job, and who knows what the hell this woman was doing. But it was what it was. You know, I mean, that was part of the problem. I watched the employees that they hire there rob the place. We would pull into a station, and onboard services, i.e. the cooks, the coach attendants, they would literally be handing cases of frozen prime rib steaks out the door to their friends waiting for them at the platform. It was ridiculous. Or they would know at a certain mile marker, they would throw them out the door, and then their friends would come and pick them up. I mean, prime ribs, fillets, lobster tails, shrimp, all kinds of stuff. It was just crazy. That's the kind of employees that they would hire through this, I mean, insane affirmative action thing. You know, it was just insane. And the money that they would squander was insane. I mean, unreal, the money that they would absolutely squander. Yeah, and, you know, and I could go on and on about it. Well, unions are a big problem. I mean, unions in this country are a huge, huge problem. And the unions in Chicago are the absolute worst. You know, during the election, the last presidential election, when I would hear people say the Chicago way, I knew exactly what they were talking about. Union, corruption, it's just ridiculous. Almost beyond description, truthfully. Almost beyond description. So anyway, Amtrak, if you could do away with the unions and you could do away with some of the hiring policies, named chiefly the affirmative action thing, I think it would change a lot of things. Now, would it still be a mess because it's a government-ran agency? Well, probably. You know, but I think it would be better if you had good managers in there. You know, I think there would be a way to cut some of the fat out, but I don't think. I think that doing away with Amtrak would be a huge, huge mistake. Huge mistake. There needs to be a capital investment in equipment. I mean, why you have a train sitting in a station literally waiting for another train to come in so you could use the engine off of it, that's crazy. That tells me that they're running, I mean, it was thin when I was there, and I haven't been there in years. But I can only imagine the way the situation is now. I mean, we had horrible equipment. We had cars that needed to be retired, you know, for years and years and years, and we were still patching them together and making them work. You know, and it's unfortunate, but that's, you know, that's the thing. I mean, it's weird because the government will fund Amtrak, but they will never really give them as much money as they need. I mean, it's just a fact. But, you know, it is what it is. You know, it's sad because I think rail travel is special. You know, I'll tell you what, when I went out west and I worked out of Albuquerque, I used to run Albuquerque to La Junta, Colorado, and Albuquerque to Kingman, Arizona. And, you know, I would see things like herds of buffalo that were on Ted Turner's ranch. Just amazing to me. Antelopes. I never even knew we had antelopes in this country until I went out west. You know, you see things from the train that's just phenomenal. I could tell a million stories, both, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly from the train. But I'm almost 10 minutes now. I didn't really mean to do that. Lee, yeah, brother, I hear you. I don't even know what to say. Keep up the good work, and maybe I'll do some more Amtrak videos because I have a lot more to say about Amtrak.